we're working on our second project, number 9.
Yeah. Now, what is it?
This one's called Prisons of the Disinformation Age.
Yeah. Aha.
And there's a whole song, like, Marley's going to sing on some of them. This is all my spoken word and then a few instrumentals.
Right.
But on the other one, there's going to be a couple songs where Marley sings.
Right.
But then there's one piece that she wrote about science.
Yeah. Aha.
And we were hoping to use your voice in the,
good.
composition.
Neat,
okay,
neat.
great.
So what kind of thing do you want me to talk about?
Yes. How important is science education and why?
Science education is an education in ways, ideally, in ways to radically reperceive everything around you. So the scientific mandate is essentially to be a heretic. The scientific mandate is to step out of, is to see the existing order that others don't see, to see the unspoken assumptions of others and of yourself, and then to step outside of them, beyond them, and to challenge them. It's right back to what Socrates used to talk about being the gadfly of Athens, because his role was always to make Athens uncomfortable so it would move on to the next step. Mm-hmm. Now, how does that sound in terms of the relationship to the artist? Who do we know as an artist who does exactly the same damn thing?
I was thinking the same thing.
Yes,
that sounds
exactly.
like what I keep telling other artists they need to look at and do.
Right. So art and science are joined at the hip. How? Through a very simple mechanism. What did you think of that?
Incredible. So this is based on the global brain.
Yeah.
Did you say that?
Yeah.
I haven't read that one yet.
He really freaked me out with the whole, coming from bacteria and just, I was like,
wow.
Isn't it amazing? I just find it an astonishing experience. Yes, it's tactile.
Tactile.
Yeah.
There's some that are more tactile.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so we'll get back down to this. Might as well close the door so we can concentrate.
You wanted some orange juice?
Yes, orange juice for Stephen. Okay, now, so back to this. Why are science and the arts joined at the hip? Because they're both modes of perception, and they are both modes of altering perception. And okay, if we regard the human race as having a single perceptual envelope, then they are both tools of expanding that common human perceptual envelope. Now, okay, you can say, Bloom, what an asshole you are. How can you say that humanity has a common perceptual envelope? I mean, there are people in Dhaka or people in Islamabad who don't perceive things the way you perceive things at all. No, we have certain things in common. Language. That's part of the basic perceptual envelope. We probably got it 2.5 million to 100,000 years ago. The concept of writing. Even the people in Dhaka who are illiterate know what writing is and know what a book is. The concept of television. Even the people in Dhaka who can't write and have never been able to own a television understand what a television is. Cell phones. This is all a perceptual envelope. Now, when you think of this as our perceptual package, our total perceptual package, you can see that over the course of historical time, we've been adding elements to this perceptual package. Language. The book, language would have been, again, 2.5 million years to 100,000 years ago. The book, that would have been added approximately 2,800 years ago to 2,300 years ago. Reading, of course, which goes along with the book and the alphabet, all those things go together. The cell phone, the 1990s, when they became common, the 2000s when they became ubiquitous.
I have one in my pocket, and it looks just like the Star Trek.
Yeah, exactly, the flip thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing.
Okay, now let's imagine this process in the future. 100 years from now, what are we going to have? Things that you and I cannot imagine. Is it going to do anything to the common envelope of human perception? You bet your buckus.
Yeah, the internet has done that.
Yeah, right. And so there are going to be more technological advances that you and I can no more foresee than if we'd been in 1890. We could have foreseen the ubiquity of a cell phone. And those are going to expand the perceptual envelope. But the technology is not the only tool of perception. Once upon a time, there was a new technology. And that new technology involved, instead of figuring out when reindeer or other big ungulates were going to ramble through your territory and then setting up camp at the time when they were going to pass through and just bagging as many of them as you could in order to eat meat. That was one approach, and it worked. It was a brilliant new approach, figuring out the timing of things. That's why humans, in all probability, began 30,000 years ago, over 30,000 years ago, to mark down calendars on eagle bones and the bones of baboons and on a mammoth tusk. They marked on little calendars.
Oh, okay.
Because if you used a calendar, you could figure out when these herding animals were going to arrive. Then, about 8,000 years ago, came up with a whole new approach to that. Instead of waiting for the animals to arrive, why don't we make friends with them? Why don't we become their team leaders? Why don't we make them hang around us so that we don't have to move all over the place to find them? And they'll move wherever, we'll take care of finding new fresh grass for them and stuff like that, but they'll always be there at our beck and call. After all, they're friendly creatures. If you run into an infant, and you try to raise it by hand, it'll stick to you for the rest of its life. Take advantage of that. Okay, so this was the domestication of animals, right? Now, this is a new technology in its own way, having the animals stick with you in your neighborhood. But it's more than a new technology. Every new technology provides a new metaphor. A new metaphor. So approximately 5,000 years after we developed animal domestication, we finally figured we could use animal domestication both to have meat whenever we wanted it, or milk if that's what we preferred, and we could use it as a metaphor. And along came a religion that used it as a metaphor. It called its leading figure, its central icon, the Good Shepherd. It called those of us who believe in him as sheep. It used the shepherding metaphor, the animal domestication metaphor.
Never thought of it that way.
Okay, so you and I do not contribute to the technological leaps directly. We're not Steve Jobs. We do not create new iPhones and iPads and stuff like that. But we're metaphor makers. We're metaphor makers. And we grab hold of things that have never been clear to humans at all, that have lurked somewhere in the mystery of our emotional being, of our second self, of our non-conscious self. And we grapple with them, and we grapple with issues in the real world around us using metaphor. Well, it's just as important to develop the metaphor of shepherding as it is to develop the reality in the material world of shepherding. It's just as important to develop the metaphor of the computer as it is to build the computer. Now, if we wanted to quibble about it, I would say developing the computer is the more important of the two, because without that you can't have the metaphor. But if you go back, if you look at the new book, The God Problem, I don't know if you've had a chance to read it.
No.
You
no.
must. You must.
I want to. My friend had bought a hard copy. And
Yeah.
I've held it.
Well, I can email you a copy if you
Okay.
remind me. But at any rate, and let's see how yes, we're at about 33% on your file. So
What is your view? What is the metaphor? Because I'm having a really hard time with the whole GMOs, genetically modified organisms, only because we eat them.
I love them.
You love them?
I absolutely love them.
You don't care that none of it's tested, and Proposition 37 for labeling.
Well, remember, once upon a time, we started, about the same time that we came up with the domestication of animals, we came up with something else. We decided, okay, instead of going out and looking for vegetable stuff to eat, why don't we plant it right around us, and we can stay in place and have the vegetable stuff herded, just the way we herded the animals. Okay, so we took these wild grasses that had tiny little seeds, and we started doing genetic engineering. How did we do it? We started crossbreeding these things. And what we eventually did was we crossbred a kind of grass that can't exist without us. It can't exist without us. Sounds like Dow Chemical these days, right?
Yeah. Now they're working Agent Orange into soybeans.
Right, and so here's what we did. Here's the deal. We made a deal with the animals. Okay, we will keep you safe. We will keep wolves away. We will keep all those predators that scare the shit out of you, literally, away from you. We will make sure we find you fresh grass all the time, that you're well fed. And we will do all of this for you in exchange for, you don't know when your death is going to come. A certain number of you are going to die because we're going to put you in our cooking pots. But hey, compare that to death out there in the wild, where you starve to death, where you die of disease, where the wolves get you.
I wouldn't want to go back to the wild.
Yeah, right. And we're offering you a better deal. That's in essence the deal we made with the animals. We made the same damn deal with plants. We said, okay, here's the deal. Right now, you put out these seeds and you hope that we animals will eat them because then we'll shit them out someplace at a distance and we'll act as your transport mechanisms, right? And then you're going to take a chance that those seeds are going to land in someplace fertile, and you know that only 1 in 1,000 is going to land in someplace fertile. You're taking a big gamble. Here's the deal we'll make with you. You hold on to those seeds. Don't disperse them. Make them really, really big and fat. Make a huge investment in them. And in exchange for that huge investment and for sticking to the stalk so that you don't disperse any longer, we will harvest you. And we will make sure that you get replanted every year. Not in any random place, but in some place we've picked to be specifically the kind of soil and climate that you find to be paradise. We will keep you in paradise. Your only sacrifice is hold on to your seeds and make them big and fat. That's the deal we made. It was genetic engineering. We had no idea what will come of it. And Leva, think of this for a second. Most people don't realize this. Plants have defense mechanisms. Plants, where do we get poisons from? Plants. Why? Why do plants have poisons? Plants have poisons to defend themselves against people like you and me. Broccoli still tastes as bitter as it does because of the remnants of the poisons that we haven't bred out of it yet. But we've bred the poisons out of most of these things.
More poisonous?
Yeah, these things were far more poisonous. And they work in teams. They signal to each other across distances. A bunch of years ago, this is in Global Brain, but a bunch of horses were dying in Kentucky. And it was mysterious. Nobody could figure out why. And it turned out that there was a cherry tree in the neighborhood, and the horses were eating the cherries. But these were wild cherries. These were not domesticated cherries. And these cherries didn't want to be eaten the long period of the year by horses.
Yeah, I saw a documentary on apples, and apples tasted terrible.
Yeah, and because all these things... Now, apples are designed for you and me to eat because the apple tree wants us to shit out the seeds in some different location and take its chances. But of course, we made a deal with the apples. We'll plant your seeds in good, rich locations. You just don't have to do the poisons anymore. We'll take care of it.
But now we'll, put in flounder genes.
Yeah, right.
Cell invasion technique.
But in reality, we've been doing that for 9,000 years.
But we're using viruses and bacteria to invade.
True. But one way or the other, those are the kinds of things that gave us the genetic variety that we worked with to begin with a long time ago.
But it doesn't bother you that stuff's not labeled or
I would love it if
effects?
I think it should be labeled.
Yeah.
So we know. So if we're having a reaction, we know what to stay away from. I think it should be labeled.
Some of them are antibiotics. I know the Flavor Saver tomato was an antibiotic.
Yeah.
One of the first.
Right. Well, it should be labeled so people like me who don't give a shit can try it, and people who care can avoid it.
So here's a metaphor. My new movie, it starts out as a documentary, and then it goes into me fighting Monsanto Corporation, and I become my shadow self, Monsanto Leba.
Yeah,
and I'm running for Congress. I'm pro-GMO.
Yeah.
And I'm saying in the future, you'll be able to grow your favorite food on your face. And you are what you eat, and you eat what you are.
That's
There's
neat.
a metaphor.
That's neat.
Be your own garden.
Yeah. So, but at any rate, okay, the first 2 rules of science, you know that I learned this at the age of 10. It's what galvanized me. It's what's kept me going for the rest of my life.
What's the origin?
I was sitting in my... We had lived in a teeny weeny little house when I was first born, and so we only had 1 floor, and it was so tiny it was ridiculous. The whole apartment was the size of a postage stamp. And then my dad had done well with his liquor store. I mean, my dad was in the poison selling business, unfortunately.
Really?
And he moved us to a very big house with a Frederick Law Olmsted Park on the other side of the street and a Frank Lloyd Wright house behind us. Can you imagine?
Wow.
What a privilege. And so I was sitting one day at the age of 10 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday in our great big living room, which was, because it was for formal use, the drapes, these big heavy velvet drapes, were always closed. Here we get a view of the park across the street. My mom always kept the drapes closed. So I'm sitting in this big dark bedroom, and you know how when you're a kid, you know the location of every book in the house. Your parents have a certain number of books, and they've all been in the same place.
Including The Joy of Sex.
Yeah, right. They've been in the same place forever. And so you know every book. Well, there was a book in my hands I didn't know. I don't know the location of it. I don't know where it came from. I know it was a book for adolescents, one of the few juvenile books I've ever read in my life. And there it was in my hands at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And it said two things. It said there are two rules of science. The first rule of science is the truth at any price, including the price of your life. And it gave the example of Galileo, and it gave it all wrong. And it told it as if Galileo was willing to go to the stake the way Giordano Bruno went to the stake with a leather gag in his mouth, and that wasn't true. But I needed the mythologized version, where Galileo was the hero, ultimately willing to sacrifice his life for the truth. So that's rule number one: the truth at any price, including the price of your life. If you have to go down in flames over it, if you literally have to die for it, fuck that. Do it. And rule number two was look at things right under your noses if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there. Look at things that everybody around you and you yourself take for granted as if you've never seen it before, and then proceed from there. What is your art about?
Same thing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's also the two rules of art.
Right.
But that also brings me into the next question, because...
Well, wait, I want to say one concluding statement, and that is, that's why we are both antennae. Ezra Pound said that artists are the antennae of society. We're both the antennae of society. You're an antenna of society as an artist. I'm an antennae of society as a scientist. But I find that my science is my right hand, my art is my left hand. And you know, I did my first gallery show 2 years ago at Art Basel, which is the most competitive art festival in North America.
Yeah, you told me.
Yeah, so people see these photos, and you're seeing them totally unedited, and go, "Oh my God, I didn't know you did that." Hell, how could I do what I do in science if I didn't have my art?
Yeah.
Because they're all about pushing the envelope of human perception, just the way the people who invented the first language pushed that envelope.
But it creates an alienation, so...
well, that's a goal, is to create an alienation, so that people see what they always took for granted from an totally unaccustomed point of view. These pictures are designed, you're seeing a lot of crap here, but the best of these pictures are designed to make you go, "Oh my God, what's that?" And then every single one of them turns out to be something that you pass literally hundreds of times a day.
Yeah, I remember when we walked through the park
Right.
in the summer, there was some weird plant coming off a tree, and we didn't even know what it was. You have any advice? Because I think this also leads to the fact that we're like truth seekers and truth speakers, which you get enemies when you do that.
Right.
So Marley's other question was, do you have any advice for those in pursuit of truth? How do we protect ourselves from cynicism and discouragement in the face of adversity? Okay,
there are two things, because Marley and I discussed this a little bit on Facebook. And step number one is be polite. First, let other people talk, listen to what they have to say, and respect what they have to say, even if you disagree dramatically. Put yourself in their shoes. Try to understand how they see things the way they do. Because if you do, you're only going to expand yourself. It's more important to expand yourself in your own comprehension of things than it is to start an argument. So that's step one. Respect the person that you're talking to. And, I've stepped into, one day I was taking a flight in from Newark from God knows what lecture I was giving or something like that. And I always ask the cab drivers if I could sit in the front seat, because for me, driving a car and looking out the view is a great rarity. And I love to look at the view. And so I sat down next to the cab driver, and he had an accent. I immediately asked him where he was from. He's from Egypt. Okay, I said, look, I'm a Zionist, an atheist, and a Jew. I want to put my cards up front. If he was going to hate me and knife me, he might as well knife me now, right? And because that's the enemy in the Arab world. That's like saying you're a Nazi in the Arab world. Well, we ended up in a conversation about what's going on in Egypt that got me so tuned to the Egyptian. I follow the news on this. It's very different when you got a person there. And he was telling me how the Mubarak regime and its cronies were like vampires, sucking the blood and wealth out of the people of Egypt. And it was his emotional tone that you could read more vividly than anything else. And by the time I got out of the car, he said, I don't care if you're a Jew, a Zionist, an atheist. I want a world with more people like you. If we have more people like you, we would accomplish amazing things. And then a few months later, the Arab Spring started, and I did 7 radio shows, commenting day by day about the Arab Spring, in part because of having spoken to him, in part because of having debated one-on-one with a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, in part because I follow these things like a hawk. But the point I'm making is that without being blunt about where I stood, without offending him, and without my immense curiosity about what life looked like through his eyes, I wouldn't have expanded my own understanding. And it's the truth at any price, including the price of your life, Buzzard. Wake up.
You could have been stabbed, like you said.
So that means listening to other people. And step number 2, be polite. Don't deliberately start a fight about things. I have a friend who deliberately starts fights about things.
Don't
and it's
argue
terrible.
immediately.
No, if you find something really important, once you've really heard the other person's point of view out, then it may be worthwhile to bring it up. And then again, it may not. Wait, I should turn this off. Okay. So that's the advice. Don't be argumentative. If you have an important thing to say, hold on to it until the right moment and then begin to say it. It is more important for you to convince the other person than it is to battle with the other person.
That makes sense.
And that means waiting until the right moment and then being polite about your argument, not seeking arguments. Recognize that every idea is really like a tattoo. We wear tattoos in order to identify ourselves as part of a social group that we aspire to be a part of, and as not being a part of the social groups that we don't want to be a part of, because every group makes its identity out of what it opposes. And like the tattoo, the ideas are there as badges of identity for a social group. And usually when we get into an argument, we don't recognize it, but we're operating as the tongue of a social group that's declaring its identity and its separateness from the social group of the person you're talking to. No, don't do that. Take those ideas on their own merit, your ideas on their own merit, not as badges of identity in your social group, because that's only going to get you in trouble with other people. Look, let others have closed minds. Let others only think the way they need to think in order to be part of the group they aspire to. Don't you do that. Your job as an artist, your job as a thinker, your job as a scientist, whatever the hell you are, your job is to comprehend as much truth as possible. And to do that, you have to step out of your social group and be a part of no social group, periodically. So that's what seeking truth is all about. And guess what you accomplish on behalf of this greater globe of collective human perception?
Maybe less enemies?
Not just less enemies, you advance it. Because when you go outside the boundaries of the group, you explore new territory. Okay. Once upon a time, Deborah Gordon, if I've got this experiment correct, Deborah Gordon works with harvester ants. And actually, Deborah is not the only one to do this. This has been done a lot in the history of humans and studying ants. You take a colony of ants out of their colony. You put them in a field in the middle of nowhere. What do? They mill around in a circle. Then eventually some of the ants on the outside become a little curious, and they step outside the circle a little bit, and they explore just a half an inch, and then they get really nervous. And they need to be reassured. And so they rush back into the group to get reassurance, which means antenna rubbing and mutual regurgitation, spitting up into each other's mouth and stuff. What are they doing when they become insecure? This is a search mechanism at work. It's like knitting and taking another loop in knitting. They're going just a half inch beyond where the group has ever been before. Then they're coming back and instantly reporting. And it's not until they've reported and gotten all the greetings and taken care of all the antenna rubbing.
I feel like that as an artist.
Yeah, well, and the antenna rubbing and the regurgitation is the artist's way of reporting on where the artist has just been. And then the ant, once it's been hugged and rubbed and all kinds of stuff, in the process of which it transfers all kinds of data on this strange territory, then it goes back out another half inch.
So it goes back and it goes, oh, everyone's going to hate me and think it's crazy because I got this new information and they're going to think I'm insane.
You're exactly
or whatever.
Correct. That's it.
And then they'll slowly embrace it.
Yeah, so that panic is an essential part of being an artist because it drives you back into the arms of society to report on this strange territory that you've just been exploring, even if it's only a strange territory in your own mind. Because remember, the mind is like Carlsbad Cavern. I think I gave you this before. Carlsbad Cavern is this amazing place.
Been there twice.
Okay, so you know the entryway is about 4 stories high. It's this great big arch. And that means the sun comes pouring in. And the sun pours in about 400 feet. or something like that. And then the sun stops, it slowly tapers off, and then it turns out there are miles of caverns with no sunlight at all. Well, the mind is like, or our emotional self, is like Carlsbad Caverns. And so far, that perceptual, that collective perceptual engine, not only does it reach out to explore outer reality, it reaches in to explore inner reality. And some of the realities you and I discover as artists and scientists is in the darkness of all those miles and miles of caverns within ourselves, and some of it is in the darkness of the world outside of us. So our obligation is to come back with new metaphors, come back with new things that are, your work is so startling because it shocks the shit out of anybody who looks at it.
I know, and I have a lot of people in my life that are saying, hey, you know, like, pull back with the politics or the sexuality,
Yeah.
you know, you're gonna, you know, I'm 46 now, and
Yeah.
they're like worried about me once again,
Right.
like they did in my 20s, and now
Yeah.
they're doing it again.
Right.
Like, I should own property, I should, you know, maybe if I wasn't so radical with the
Yeah.
work.
Right. No, you can't stop being radical because it's being radical. It's the value of your work. It's, you know, the first time I opened a Liba work, I got this big manila envelope in the mail, and it felt weird because it flopped around.
Don't you have someone opening your mail? I would be worried if someone.
Well, I opened that one. I opened that one myself, and then it slid out on my hand, and it
like a
flopped.
pizza pie.
Right, it flopped, and of course there was this Indian beating. Okay, that's the most cliche aspect of it.
1% of respectability.
Yeah, the only familiar aspect of it. And then, and the minute it comes out of the envelope, before I even consciously see it, my system is shocked. And like someday I got to write a book about a tale of two selves. There are basically two selves within us. There's a conscious self and an unconscious self. The unconscious self perceives things a lot faster than the conscious self does. This is demonstrated by experiments with tachistoscopes. One of my friends, once upon a time, Tom Edelman, I forget his last name for the moment, but at any rate, Tom, for his graduate thesis, his PhD thesis, did the following experiment. He took you into a room and showed you a huge screen and gave you a list of adjectives to circle. And you looked at the screen and nothing happened. There was nothing there. And then he asked you to circle the adjectives that felt appropriate to you at the moment. And you circled bloody, grim, violent, horrid, all this kind of stuff. And then he brought another group of people into the room and he showed them a screen that seemed to just flicker. All they saw was a flick. They couldn't see anything of what the flick was. And they were asked to circle adjectives. And they circled bloody, grim, violent, you know, all the usual stuff, ugly. And then he gave it the tachistoscope flashes things at 1,000th of a second, 2,000ths of a second, 3,000ths of a second.
Wow.
So he gave just a little bit more time so that you could actually sense that there was an image on the screen, but not quite make it out. And all of a sudden, people started to do beautiful,
Really?
deep, meaningful. What he was doing was flashing Picasso.
Really?
Yes. And when Picasso was only seen by the non-conscious mind was horrified. Why? Because it took me years to figure out what Picasso was doing in his paintings. He's taking a meat axe to people. He's taking a cleaver to people.
People still have a problem with cubism.
Yeah, and it's especially the women that he's painting that he takes a meat axe to. It's very violent stuff.
It is.
So
Right.
when it was only your unconscious self that was seeing it, yeah, it was seeing it. It can see. Even if it doesn't tell you, it's seeing. And it was
Subliminal
registering
art.
the horror. But then you're conditioned by society to say that Picasso's great art. And great art is beautiful and deep and meaningful and all of that
A
stuff.
lot of people still resent having to like Picasso.
Yes, and I always resented having to like Picasso. His blue period was what I liked before he got
well,
Cubist.
I don't really like the blue period.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. But so at any rate, the point is that you've got these two different selves. Okay, which self responds when you're sliding your very first Liba out of an envelope? It's the unconscious self that responds so quickly that it doesn't even report to your conscious self what it's seen.
Because it doesn't know.
Yeah, it doesn't know, but your non-conscious self does know. Okay, so then you take a good look at it once you've slid it out of the envelope. And then when it's like a Necker cube. You know the Necker cube, where first one face resolves itself as being in front, then the other face resolves itself as being in front.
Yeah.
Okay, first your perception registers it as a bunch of assholes, penises, and balls, right? And vaginas. And then you realize why you've been shocked. Because it's assholes, penises, balls, it's orifices. And there's something horrifying about these orifices because you've never quite seen them this way before.
But you told me initially that you had looked at it for some time, and it was your wife that looked at it, and she saw the genitals and the asshole.
Oh, that could be.
And then you're like, what? And then
that could be. But
so it took a while.
But then your visual system resolves it differently, and you see it as a portrait. And your visual system flips back and forth. But the value of it is, it gets you in the gut. It punches your non-conscious system into motion.